Hi everybody, my name is Sheila Horton and I'm here today to talk to you about porch gardening. Gardening is planted deep in my soul by my grandmother and my mother, and so is the passion to provide fresh vegetables for my children. Unfortunately, up to this point in my life, I've not been able to have enough time to plant my own garden or the space to plant a ground garden the way my mother and my grandmother did. So I've done some investigation about porch gardening. My mother actually had a porch garden once we moved away from home. In the meantime, I've been using farmers markets. And if you've ever tried to do that, even in a small town like Burleson, where we have several farmers markets available, you usually find that you're buying vegetables that are too hard or too soft, or even if they're just right and they're ripe just enough for that day, they'll spoil within just a few hours or days, and it just makes it frustrating. Well, that frustration has driven me back to my roots, and I've decided to start my own porch garden. I have a picture of the one that I'd like to emulate, so let me show you that first of all. As you can see, there are shelves and different kinds of containers, and I plan to plant tomatoes, peas, cucumbers, peppers, onion, garlic and herbs, and those all have to be planted in different kinds of pots. So the very first thing that you do as a porch gardener is that you make sure that you have the sunlight right. You decide what you're going to plant, and then you look those things up. And I found that in each of my categories, they need 7 to 10 hours of direct sunlight. What you'll do is to figure out whether or not you get more sun in the front of your house or the back of your house, and this plant accordingly. And I intend to use my front porch just because I'll get that much direct sunlight in the middle of the day from the front instead of the back. I'll have to actually use 3 different kinds of containers, and that's the very next thing that you do is to choose the containers for the vegetables. There are different things that work for different vegetables, but I've just found through some of my own research and thinking of looking back on my mother's porch garden that cocoa baskets work the best for tomatoes and for peas. Tomatoes and peas work well together. They're companion planters. You can plant a tomato on the bottom of a container and the peas on the top because the way they share the water distributes it right. Peas need drier moss, and the tomatoes need it to be moist as if it had rained an inch every day. So let me show you a picture of the cocoa basket that I'm talking about. It's made of some material that kind of looks like a coconut from the outside. It's straw. It's a little tough like a coconut. And the way that you prepare those for tomato planting and for peas on the top is that you take the baskets out of the metal frame, and you make a long incision across the bottom. Just cut a slot across the bottom. And through that, what you're going to do is to slide a tomato plant out. And once the tomato plant comes up to the outside, the root system stands up on the inside of the soil, and then you plant the peas on the top. This is what it actually looks like with the tomato plant coming out of the bottom, and you'll just plant the peas on the top of that hanging basket. The sunlight is exactly the same. The water is just a little different, and the way that they work together keeps them both happy. For the peas and the garlic, they need a drier environment. Garlic tends to get rotten or sodden if it's too wet for too long, so it has to have a good drainage. And it also needs to keep the dirt, or the dirt, that's what we call it, inside the pot hot, like warmer. For peppers, the warmer the better because it actually makes the peppers a little warmer. So I've decided to use clay pots for both of those. And you've seen regular, ordinary clay pots. I'll be planting garlic in one and peppers in the other. And then for everything else, I'm going to plant into a large plastic tub. It will hold I'm going to have it hold about 14 inches of dirt. It's a 30-inch wide by 42-inch long tub and plastic tote. It's one of those you can buy at Walmart for $5 to $7, sometimes $10, depending on the size. And inside that tub, I'll actually have 3 separate rows for the rest of the vegetables: the cucumbers, the onions, and what else was it? The other thing. And in the summertime, I'll have time to have harvested the spring vegetables, and I can replant potatoes and carrots and celery in the same tub. So that's the reason I've chosen to use that tub. As the third thing that you need to do is to mix your own dirt. We're not able, like my grandmother was, to go out with her tiller and turn the dirt over and take all the rocks out. Unfortunately, what we do instead, or not unfortunately, but what we do instead is we use a spade, just a little regular garden spade, and it'll help us to organize the dirt as we mix it together and put it into the separate pots. It'll help us to plant easier, the pot down deep enough into the soil. And so I purchased that for myself today. I also got, while I was in the mood, a pair of gloves. Hopefully that'll be my inspiration to get out there and get going. They're my favorite color. On this last thing that you do, you're trying to mix the dirt together. And because we can't go and till it ourselves, we have to make sure we have all the right components. Peat moss has to be used. Also, topsoil needs to be used, and some sort of synthetic fertilizer. If we were planting in the ground, I'd be concerned about synthetic fertilizer, but since it's not going to go into our ground soil, it works fine for our purposes. We can purchase a bag of already mixed. I have purchased a bag of that today. It's just called a starter mix. And if you see at the bottom, it'll say for plants and for seeds. And you don't want to buy the ones that are just for seeds, because then it's just a starter, just to start the seeds off. But if it's for plants and seeds, you can use it in a porch garden. Because I'm going to use the volume of soil I'm going to use, I'll probably end up buying 3 separate bags, or 2 or 3 separate bags of each kind, and mixing them all together so that I have enough soil to finish my garden. My granny had 6 children. She raised them on fresh vegetables. My mother had 3 children, and she raised us on fresh vegetables, and I hope to pass that tradition down to my children. So my porch garden is a very exciting event for me. Hopefully I can get them to work with me on spring break. As long as we remember to find the place where they'll get enough sun, to water them correctly according to the way that they need to be watered, put them by the front door if we need to be reminded to water them on time, and to make sure that they're potted in the right containers to keep the water and the soil in the consistency it's supposed to have, then we'll be sure to have a successful porch garden. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial.